Hello, this is a description of a 5-day hut-to-hut traverse of the Polish Tatra mountains that I undertook in June of 2022. At the beginning of that year, I had no thoughts about going to Poland, but I got invited to speak at the Global Forum on Nicotine in Warsaw. And they said that if I turned up in person rather than by Zoom, they would pay my travel expenses. So my first thought is, where is Warsaw and is there any good hiking near there? So as you can see, Warsaw is in the middle of Poland. Poland is surrounded by the Baltic Sea to the north and Lithuania to the northeast, by Belarus and Ukraine to the east, by Slovakia and Czechia to the south, and by Germany to the west. Central Poland is relatively flat, but if you go down to the south, you come to a small town called Zakopane, which is in the Polish Tatra mountains that are part of the Carpathian Mountains that cross Hungary, Ukraine, and Slovakia. The Carpathian Mountains look like this. In the west, they're lower lying and green, and in the distance in the east, they are high and rocky and called the High Tatras. So I found a guide, and she proposed that we do a tour starting in the west with the Green Tatras and heading eastwards into the High Tatras. So I flew to Warsaw. This is downtown Warsaw with the main train station. The white building is the refugee center for the Ukrainian refugees. This is the old town of Warsaw that was completely destroyed by the Germans in the Second World War and has since been rebuilt. And it's a great place to hang out in the evening and find some food and some music. The main shopping areas have now all been totally restored and are quite prosperous, having recovered from a period of communist rule. This is the downtown at night. It's a very vibrant city. And the downtown area is a mixture of old and new buildings. And I was actually staying in the Marriott Hotel, which is in the middle here. It's half a Marriott Hotel and half a Samsung office, which was curious, but it seemed to work fine. I gave my presentation and took part in a panel discussion. And as soon as that was over, I took the bus heading south. So the Flixbus was very comfortable. I booked the seat at the very front and we drove along the highways. And after about 4 hours, we came to Krakow, and I had 2 hours waiting there, which gave me time to do a quick tour of the old town. And then I got back on the bus for another 2 hours to Zakopane. So Zakopane is known for its style of wooden architecture. It's in winter a ski resort town and accepts tourists throughout the year. You can see here interesting architecture, a lot of flowers, a horse and cart, people drinking ice, people eating ice cream. And I stayed here at the Zakopane Grand Hotel. Poland is remarkably reasonable. This was $100 Canadian a night for a suite. I met my guide here and we discussed what I would be taking on the hike and what could stay at the hotel. Basically, the huts would provide all the accommodation and all the food. So I just needed my clothing, my personal effects, my electronics, my toiletries. Next morning, we took a little walk through the suburbs of Zakopane, which were quite fascinating. And then we took a minibus to the trailhead. And so for the first day, we're planning to go up the Chokolaska Valley to a mountain called Mount Grez. This was about 834 meters of ascent over 13 kilometers. Began fairly easy on a cart track. And this is where we're heading Mount Grez, 653 meters. We stopped off at the shepherd's hut to get some sheep's cheese, which actually was quite awful. It's perhaps the worst thing I ate in Poland. Then we continued, dropped our stuff off at this hut in a 6-bed dorm room, and then continued further up the hill, climbing through the woods with this nice view, and then continuing upwards until eventually I came to my first Polish peak, which is also my first Slovakian peak. The peak marks the Slovakian-Polish border. The S is for Slovakia there. And if you look at the view, looking out to the left, you see Slovakia. Then you see where the vegetation changes on the hillside. And there's a little trail. That's the Slovakian-Polish border. And everything on the right is in Poland. Next day, we went off to do the Ornac Ridge, It had rained overnight, so everything was nice and fresh and green the next day. And we headed up this trail. You can see the trail marker. The trail markers are white bands with a colored strip in between. So we were on the black trail here. We just continued to go up and up. And I kept on thinking, I'm not fit enough to do this. I'm getting too old for this sort of thing. But then we came out to the Siwa Pass. And this is looking in the opposite direction to an optional extra hill we could have climbed, but we decided not to. But it was a beautiful spot. We headed in this direction to Mount Ornac. So it's quite a level trail for a while with a nice ridge. And then a bit of a scramble to get over the peak of Ornac. And then we continued downwards on a nice ridge walk. And eventually we came to the point where we had to get off the ridge and go down through these dwarf stone pines on a very well-made path. But it was a long way down. This is the valley we're heading down into. You can perhaps make out the hut that we're heading to for the night and also for the lake that we're going to visit after we've dropped our bags at the hut. I'm calling these places huts because that's what people call them, but in many ways they were like resort hotels with showers, Wi-Fi, cooked food and alcoholic refreshment. But also they had dormitory rooms and you slept on bunk beds in dormitories. We refreshed ourselves with some Ukrainian pancakes and some coffee, and then headed up to the lake, which was very pretty, worth the detour. Next day, we were heading off on a ridge walk again, covering 4 peaks, all of about 2,000 meters. This is going to be 14 kilometers, but with 1,302 meters of ascent. So at this stage, the trail got a little bit narrow, but later on it opened out. And so we just continued going upwards and huffing and puffing until eventually we came up to the summit and we had this magnificent view of the ridge that we're going to walk along and the next mountain and the mountain after that and the mountain after that. This stage we had a little bit of an episode. A fox came and stole my lunch and he ate my Polish cheese, so I was quite happy to get rid of that. At this time of year, the wildflowers are all in bloom, so saw a lot of wildflowers, took a lot of pictures of those. And that was a good excuse whenever I got tired and wanted to take a little break and get my camera out and take some pictures. So this is looking to the north towards the town of Zakopane, which you can just see sprawled out in the distance. And here the road continues. You can see the red marker for the Polish-Slovakian border. So everything on the right of the trail is in Slovakia, everything on the left is in Poland, but obviously a completely unprotected border. This was the final summit. I was quite glad to get there. You can see me resting against it. And then we had to go down again. And eventually we got to the top of a pass and we had to head down into this valley. The path that you can see is about half the distance you had to walk. And once you got down into the valley, you continued into the woods and continued walking. The next morning, we're heading up onto the Kasprawi cable car. You can just see the cable car in this picture. And we're going over the Krzyny Pass and going down to the Five Lakes Hut. Another day of 962 meters of ascent. So this is the top of the cable car looking back down at Zakopane. You might think at this stage we would go up onto the ridge and walk along the ridge like we'd done in previous days, but this time as soon as we got to the peak, we headed straight down to the next valley. Now this isn't because my guide is a sadist, it's because that's the safe way to get to where we're going. So we began at the top of the cable car, and we needed to get to the Five Lakes Hut, which is in the middle of the picture. So if we'd followed along the peaks, we'd follow the red route, which is really a mountaineering route. It's not intended for regular hikers. So the hiking route is the yellow route along the top of the picture until about the middle, and then you go straight down over the pass, and then you take a turn to the right, go along the side of the mountain and down to the middle of Three Lakes, and then onto the Finger Lakes hut. This is the path where it began. It's nice and even. It looks like it used to be a cart track at one stage. Then we went down into a valley and through a wooded section. So you can see a bridge and a stream, and that made quite a nice change for a while. And then we came out into the valley, which was very pleasant and enjoyable, except that we knew what was ahead of us. We were going to have to go over this pass here to get out of the valley. So walking along the floor of the valley, it was a nice sunny day. It was a nice, well-made path. Had pine trees on both sides. Then things started to get a little bit more rocky, a bit of some scree in places, although in fact our path kept us to the left of the scree. We found some snow and we had to cross that, but that wasn't really any issue. And we kept on going up. You can just see two figures there in the foreground. This gives you an idea of the scale of things. And we kept away from the scree. It was a well-made path. You can see here how there's stepping stones all the way up. In a few places there were exposed rocks that you had to scramble over. That was a bit sketchy, and sometimes we finally got here. And this is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. So this was the view that I was admiring. You can see that there's 3 lakes, and we're going to go to the left-hand lake to the Five Lakes hut. And then the next day we're going to go follow the blue arrows and go over a couple more passes and get down into the valley that's hidden in the background here. So I just love these hikes where you can see exactly where you're going to go. It's a bit of a scramble on the way down. It was actually sometimes more dangerous than the way up. But there were fantastic views across the hillsides in the distance. Once we got to the traverse, I thought it would be easier, but in fact it wasn't. It was a little bit sketchy in places. You had to be quite careful where you put your feet. So I was very glad when we got to this situation and we started doing a proper path down to the lake. And it was nice to see the lake. It was beautiful, crystal clear water. Then we walked along the side of the lake for a while and finally got to the Five Lakes hut. By this time, I'd been hiking for 7 hours. I was completely exhausted. I just lay down on top of my dirty clothes on the bed for about an hour and did nothing. And then I got up and got things organized and went to the dining room, which you can see is quite basic and rustic, but totally functional. And I had some zorek, which is a traditional Polish soup made with potatoes and sausages. That was very good. I followed on with some breaded chicken and some fresh potatoes and dill, and washed it all down with some English cider. Had a good night's sleep, and in the next morning I felt very much better. I came across this site. This is a bride and groom having their wedding photographs taken at the hut. Apparently it's a Polish tradition to come to a beauty spot like this for your wedding photographs. It's about a 4 or 5 hour hike from the nearest trailhead, but you end up being able to use this background for your wedding photographs. So I can understand why they think that's worthwhile. Then it was time to leave this area, which was kind of sad, but all good things come to an end. So a final bit of hiking up this path. As you looked across to the other side, you could see exactly where we'd been the day before. And the arrows are there to point out where we crossed the pass, where we went down into the steep gully and then into traverse and then came down to the middle of the 3 lakes and then finally to the Finger Lakes hut. So for the final time, we had a long descent, going all the way down into the valley at the bottom. You can see the trail starts on the left and then crosses and goes down to the right. And this is where we're heading to Morskie Oko, which is the dark lake in the very middle of this photograph. When we got there, it was very popular. It was a beautiful sunny day. This is a nice day trip for a lot of people. There was the option of hiking around the lake and even going up at the far end to another pass. But to be honest, by this time I was all hiked out, and I was very grateful that we were able to find a horse and cart that would take us down to the bus stop. And from there we could get a bus to Zakopane. So I found a pub in Zakopane, got myself a Polish beer and some pierogies and bacon. This all came to about 10 Canadian dollars, which seemed like a good deal. And that was the end of my hike. So the distance wasn't very long. It was only 60 kilometers, but there were 4,000 meters of ascent. That's about 14,000 feet. And all the meters that you ascended, you had to descend again. Nevertheless, it was a really great hike, and I would recommend people adding the Tatra Mountains to their bucket list of places to go hiking.